Hello everyone, welcome back. In the previous two videos I built a BMW 003 jet engine and the cockpit of the Heinkel 162. If you are interested and haven't seen these videos, click the link and check them. This video is the final episode of the Heinkel 162 project. This Tamiya kit is pretty good base for modifications because it's nice and precise. Also, the cockpit and the wheelbase are visible after the build, so not all of our work disappears when we close the fuselage. The front wall of the main undercarriage bay is alright, it looks good, but let's improve it a little bit. The big oil tank in the middle is a little bit simplified, so I cut it off and replace it with a shaped styrene rod. I used a micro chisel to cut the unnecessary details from the surface. I used also 0.2mm lead wires to replace the hydraulics pipes. Finally, I painted the wheelbase RLM02 and the pipes Mr. Color Silver. The Heinkel 162 is an interesting aeroplane from both a technical and a historical perspective. The ministry launched the tender on the 10th of September 1944. The design was supposed to be a simple constructed airframe powered by a single BMW 003 jet engine. Short takeoff ability, approximately 500 meters from an average airstrip. Minimum of 30 minutes flight time with 100% throttle. A maximum speed of 750 km per hour, which is around 465 miles per hour, and carry two 20 or two 30mm guns. Must be ready by 1st of January 1945 for mass production. Okay, so let's think about it. From nothing, within 3 months, an airplane type that no one had ever tried before should be ready for mass production. Well, that's crazy. The deadline was 20th of September 1944. Some of the documentations mentioned only 5 days, but that doesn't really change the fact that the companies had only a couple of days to put the design together. Messerschmitt, Fiesler, Sieber resigned from the program, so only 4 companies, Arado, Blomunvos, Focke-Wulf and Heinkel remained in the tender. In the end, Heinkel won the so-called competition Volksjager. These hydraulic pipes operated the landing flaps and the landing gears. There was some text on the tank. I tried to imitate it with a fine brush. Now I believe it looks much better than the original part from the box. What do you think? I twisted a few superfine copper wires for the cable harness running through the bay. I twisted it by hand to create an uneven cable harness. Then I painted it desert yellow, and I imitate the clips on it. I used flat black. This cable harness belonged to the radio, which was located behind the main landing gear bay. Heinkel had a simple design while keep the demands of strategic materials low. Heinkel's airplane was also equipped with an ejection seat, one of the first of its kind. They called the project Heinkel 500. Because Heinkel won the project, he was guaranteed financial and material supplies. Meanwhile, Heinkel had to produce 1,000 aircraft every month from 1st of January 1945. These numbers were absolutely unrealistic because it was mid-September 1944. Heinkel had no prototype, no aerodynamic calculations or production documentations at all. All Heinkel had was just a basic concept of the plane and a fair bit of experience with the Heinkel 260. They started the work 24/7 at Schwechat Air Base, which was out of the reach of the Allies bombers. Heinkel's design team put the project together within 3 months, which is unbelievable. We shouldn't forget that it was the end of 1944, and at that time there were no computers or 3D design softwares. Basically, they did all the calculations manually with a pen and a paper. It was a fantastic performance by the engineers for sure. I also modified the wing flaps, the ailerons and the elevators a bit. I really like it when the control surfaces are in an offset position. I cut off the flaps with a saw, glued the top and the bottom together and filled the gap with a piece of styrene. After it dried, I shaped it with homemade sanding sticks. I only scratched the ailerons with a needle and bent them to the off position. At the beginning of November, the Heinkel 500 name was changed officially to Heinkel 162, and the aircraft was also named Spatz. Spatz means sparrow. Some of the sources refer the name Salamander, but it's unclear to me because, according to my research, it was a cover name for production of the wings by wood processing companies. If you know the story behind the name Salamander, please share down in the comment section. The first prototype, the Heinkel 162 V1, was completed by the end of November. On the 6th of December, Flugkapitän Peter Gotthold did the maiden flight. It was a short, low-speed test flight, approximately 20 minutes long without any significant problems. But 4 days later, on the 10th of December, the test flight turned into a disaster. The test pilot Gotthold flew a spectacular high-speed display in front of many high-ranking representatives of RLM, the Luftwaffe and of course politicians. Unfortunately, during a low-altitude high-speed around 735 km per hour low pass, the starboard wing aileron was torn off. The aircraft fell into an uncontrollable roll and ended up with an explosion on the field. Peter was only 32 years old and had been Heinkel's test pilot since 1940. The clear parts in the kit are excellent. Unfortunately, I didn't have a pre-cut mask, so I had to mask them myself. I cleared the surface properly, and then I used Tamiya thin masking tape for the job. I masked them inside and outside as well. The original Canopy had a tube frame, so I used various lead wires to make the frame inside. The cockpit wasn't pressurized, therefore the canopy design was also pretty simple. A thin clear plastic on a welded tube frame. The all-around visibility could be quite good, but the massive jet engine intake over behind the pilot blocked the back view for sure. It opened backwards. After I masked inside and outside and glued all the frames into the canopy, I painted inside RLM02 and outside rubber black. I didn't like the hydraulic pistons for the landing gear. I replaced them with copper and alloy pipes. I think it looks more realistic in this way. I also rebuilt the emergency gear release mechanism springs from alloy tubes and 0.2 mm lead wires. I cut a piece of alloy tube and carefully wrapped a thin lead wire around it. I tried to wrap it around as evenly as possible to resemble a real spring. According to the photos, it was a dark metal spring on aluminium, so I left the parts unpainted. After the tragic accident, Heinkel concentrated on two things. First, they wanted to figure out how to make a correct procedure for gluing the wooden wing parts. Another thing was they had to fix the aerodynamic defects that had not been discovered during the previous tests and calculations. The acclaimed aerodynamics expert Dr. Alexander Lippisch designed a small downward pointing wingtips from aluminium to improve lateral stability. This is basically the same as the winglets on the modern aircrafts. The nickname of the extension was Lippisch ears. These extensions became standard on series-built Heinkel 162s. They also added another aerodynamic adaptation, the sharply curved trailing edge of the flaps at the fuselage. These changes increased the overall stability of the aircraft. The second prototype, the V2, first flight was on the 22nd of December in 1944. It was only 12 days after the tragic accident of the V1. On the V3 and V4 tested the new aerodynamic changes, the Lippisch ears and the curved trailing edges. Later the V designation has changed to M as model. With all the improved features, on the 28th of February 1945, on a test flight they reached a speed of 880 km in level flight, which was significantly higher than the originally proposed specifications. The prototype M12 was tested with the more larger and heavier and more powerful Jumo 004 engine. The test was successful. This version would have been designated as the A8 variant. An interesting fact is that I didn't find anything about Model 13. Maybe it was never assigned, probably because it's an unlucky number. The M18 and the M19 received the final version of the BMW 003 E1 engines, scheduled for the series-built Heinkel 162A2. This is the busiest wheelbase I've ever built. It was fun and easy to bring simple parts to life. Eduard released an upgrade set for this kit, but traditional scratch build techniques can be used to achieve a perfect result. There was an ugly ejector pin on the nose gear strut. It was easier to replace than fill and sand, so I cut it off and rebuilt it with a piece of styrene. I painted with superfine chrome, then carefully masked and finished the paint job with RLM02. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't have precast masks for this project. However, I have a cheap circular cutting tool, so I could easily make masks for the wheels. The original photos show a lovely detail. A white stripe runs around the side of the front tire. I masked both sides and painted it with thin layers of Tamiya buff paint. I really like this fine detail. Now the airframe is ready for the paint job. I cleaned the whole surface with isopropyl alcohol and primed it with Mr. Surfacer 1200 grey primer. I applied a few thin layers of primer. I like to use primer because it creates a perfect base for the paint and shows imperfections. After fixing all the problems, I sanded the surface with superfine sanding sponges. I used marbling techniques. I tried to create a less unified surface. I used a super thin white paint mixture in my 0.2mm Sparmax airbrush with low pressure compressor settings. Please don't ask me what pressure I used. My compressor doesn't have a pressure gauge. I preferred the pre- and the post-shading techniques. I used flat earth brown for pre-shading. There are no panel lines on the wings. The wings are made of glued plywood. I tried to imitate the join lines of the plywood. I know these lines were completely invisible, but I tried to create some optical illusion. I used Mr. Color's standard RLM paints. Generally speaking, the Heinkel 162 fighter's performance differed significantly depending on the condition of the BMW jet engine. Just remember, it was one of the first jet engines in operation, not a major technology. The highest speed measured at 6,000 meters, which is approximately 20,000 feet, was 905 km per hour, while the average speed at the same altitude from other 162s was around 720 km per hour, which is a big difference. Anyhow, it is still a fantastic result from the engineers in such a short time. There were two production types, the A1 and the A2 variant. Basically, they looked identical. The only difference was the installed weapons. The A1 version had two Mk108 30mm cannons, and the A2 version had two MG151 20mm cannons. By the collapse of the Third Reich, approximately 120-140 machines were completed. I found different numbers, so that's why I said approximately. During the first operational test, it became clear that only experienced pilots could fly these new jet fighters. The easiest and quickest way to create a functional unit was to rearm an existing unit. This unit was the Jagdgeschwader 1, simply call it JG1. This unit used Focke-Wulf 190s. The transport of the new machines wasn't smooth, and there were a few accidents. During mid-April, the JG1 moved onto the airfield Lek, which is close to the Danish border, and here the unit officially became operational. Around 40 of Heinkel 162s were delivered to the airfield Lek. Luckily, we can find a few original pictures from the Lek 162s on the internet. These photos tell a lot about these aircraft. First of all the machines were different in look. The aircraft did not have a uniform appearance. The painting schemes also different from machine to machine. The pictures show that some of the machines were only primed and not properly painted. The aircraft precisely lined up next to the taxiway in 2 rows, 9 and 13 aircraft facing each other. The aircraft that I chose to build, the white one, was flown by Lieutenant Rudolf Schmidt. This plane is also seen in these famous pictures, the first in the longest row. Unfortunately, the factory number cannot be seen perfectly from the photographs. Probably it's 120013 or 120027. It's an early Heinkel Rostock production aircraft. On the 4th of May 1945, Schmidt claimed a British Typhoon fighter bomber while flying the White One. However, the fine details about the event are unclear. Schmidt recorded in his logbook that he fatally damaged the Typhoon, but he didn't witness the impact of the Allied aircraft. The only matching accident in the area was a Tempest JN877, flown by Flying Officer Tom Austin. So was it a Tempest or a Typhoon? Probably we are never going to know. Anyhow, if Schmidt was right, his victim, the Hawker, was the only victory of the Heinkel 162. On the 8th of May 1945, the Allies were taking over the airfield Lek. So the short story of the Heinkel 162 ended. Interestingly, unlike the common practice, JG1 didn't destroy the aircraft. As I mentioned, the aircraft were properly lined up, cleaned and covered by canvas. This is when the famous photo series was taken. After the war, many of the Lek 162s moved to different test airfields all around the globe. 11 of them were sent to the United Kingdom to the airfield Farnborough. Later, 2 of them were donated to Canadian museums. The work number 120098 completed 27 test flights, 11 hours and 45 minutes overall flight time. Many of the 162 tested in the United States as well. These aircraft were mainly from Lek, but US troops found a few in Munich and Austria. France received 5 aircraft, and the Soviet forces also tested 7 Heinkel 162s. 2 of them were airworthy and used these tests for future designs. I had mixed feelings about the decals. The print quality is second to none, but it's very, very thick. The decals had to be sanded back from the top of the wings because they were very thick and cracked after drying. So I sanded them back. I fixed the paint, masked and painted the marks on the bottom and the top of the wings. I trimmed the rest of the decals around with the new hobby blade and used decal chemicals to apply them. After the decals dried, I applied 2 layers of gloss and sanded back the edges with superfine sanding sponges. I really like the big opening into the cockpit. All the extra work that I put in is visible. All I had to do was glue and assemble the parts together. Thanks to the super precise engineering, everything went together quite nicely. I was worried a bit about the main landing gears, but I had no issues with them whatsoever. The alignment was absolutely perfect. Well done, Tamiya, this is a 5-star kit. The small problems that I faced during the build were easy to fix. My only criticism is the thick decals. Other than that, this is a highly recommended kit. I was really pleased with the pre and the post shading. What's more, these planes were basically new, so I applied just a touch of weathering. I used thin oil and enamel mixtures. The last detail was the canopy log that I made. It had a Z shape and a rope with a ball at the end. In an emergency, when the pilot was strapped into the ejection seat, he couldn't reach the opening lever of the canopy to release it. So he pulled the string attached to the lever, which released the canopy. It was a fun project, I really liked it. It's a fantastic kit for modifications as well. The only weak point of the kit is the thick decals. I hope you enjoy these videos of this unique fighter jet. If you like what you've seen, please support my channel, hit the like and click the subscribe with the little bell, and you won't miss the following videos. Also, please share my work, my videos, my channel with your modeler friends. It really helps me and makes me motivated. Thanks for watching. See you next time.